Classic portraiture has consistently relied on three lights to make its point. A main light to illuminate the subject and two others to add dimension and shape to the subject's form. As you will see, the modifiers we'll use will greatly influence the look of the final image. But first, let's take a minute and talk a bit about what I believe is the most important cosmetic aspect of a good portrait and something that you, as the photographer, need to look at objectively. I'm talking about your client's nose shadow. A properly placed nose shadow will visually highlight cheekbones, accent a small nose, or minimize a large one. The most important aspect of the nose shadow in general is that it follows the line of the nose and does not cross the cheekbone but curves under it. In general portraiture, the opposing cheekbone, the one furthest from the light, should be lit with a triangle of light. If the key is placed too low relative to the subject's nose, the shadow will be broad and flat, a big rectangular chunk of dark that becomes a visual barrier to the flow of lines through your subject's face. But if it's placed too high, the shadows over the bone ridge of the brow are too severe, and the eyes appear to be set very deeply. As we try some modifiers, let's assume we've been hired to produce a basic personal portrait, something our client might want to give her husband for the desk in his office. I've chosen a 36-inch umbrella because it will throw a clean, snappy light with a distinct shadow. I might have also chosen a small softbox, maybe 2 by 3 feet, but my subject has beautiful skin with minimal blemishes that will take the more contrasty light terrifically. I like to position my key about 18 inches above the subject's eye level. Now, I base this position on the height of the strobe head itself, not the top of the softbox or the umbrella. My preference is only a rule of thumb, of course, because the shape of the nose and the eyebrow ridge may call for an adjustment in the height of the strobe head, while the thickness of the nose will determine the angle of incidence. In other words, a wider or more protruding nose will dictate the key light closer to camera, while the opposite would happen with a narrow or smaller nose. After determining the proper position of the key, and with my client's face turned to camera, look at the beautiful modeling of the contours of her face. Unless you're using the butterfly light scenario, there will be a shadow on the unlit side of the face. Do you want it lighter, darker? It's a personal decision you'll have to make, and one based on the intended use of the image and the look of your subject. If you'd like it lighter, you have a number of options. Remember, the larger the source, the softer the light. Whatever shadow is left will be opened up or minimized. If you want the option of changing the light to dark ratio on the fly, it may be inconvenient to switch back and forth from softbox to umbrella. In that case, a white fill of some kind is a perfect solution. Aside from adding another strobe, I have two types of white fill always available in my studio. The first comes in the form of a collapsible fill card like this, made by Last-A-Light or other manufacturers. I simply will attach this to a sandbag light stand with an Avenger accessory arm and move it into position. Since the effects of light are cumulative and I've added light even though the reflector is not an active light source, I'll remeter. If there's a change, I'll either adjust with my PowerPack's variator or simply move the light slightly away from my subject in a straight line along its axis, and usually only a couple of inches, till I get the same reading I had before adding the fill. The Avenger accessory arm is adjustable from 27 to 72 inches, so if I'm working with a relatively small area, like a head and shoulder, I'll just attach my Last-A-Light, which I also use to custom white balance my light, and swing the white side to my subject. My favorite fill accessory, the foam core bookend. It's lightweight, inexpensive, and extremely versatile. You simply tape two sheets of 4 by 8 foot white foam core together along one common spine. And to use it, just fold it open and let it stand by itself. You can position one side to catch light from the key or open it wider to catch even more light and wrap it evenly around the entire shadow side. There are two other lights in use in a classic portrait scenario. The first is called the hair light because it's aimed at the hair and shoulders of the subject. It's usually set behind and to the side of the subject to graze with just enough light to add dimension and shape to the body. tonal merger, in which the tones or densities of the shadows match the tones and densities of the background and then merge together, is avoided, and the subject is given a more three-dimensional appearance. Because the subject is kicked out of the background, we also call such lights kickers. The shape of a kicker, like the shape of a key, is influenced by the modifier used. Let's take a look at a few different modifiers and how they affect our subject. Small parabolic reflectors throw a hard, contrasty light with easily seen shadows and bright specular highlights, especially on the tips of the ears. This can be perfect for some editorial or photo illustrative applications, but murder on more traditional jobs. Switch to an umbrella, and the light gets softer but is very broad. Be aware that light may spill from the umbrella over the head and fall onto the top of the nose. A very unattractive place to be. A foolproof way to determine where the light is falling is to turn off the key light's modeling lamp when placing the hair light. Whenever a light is positioned behind a subject, it's possible that the light might flare into the lens, causing reflections across the glass elements inside the lens, or a reduction in color contrast, sort of like looking through a fog. Flares are easily controlled by using an appropriate lens hood or by attaching a small flag to an Avenger accessory arm and moving it in to shadow the lens. If the light is high enough, you can use a lens hood to keep flare off the lens. If you're using a zoom, be sure the hood is wide enough so it will not vignette the frame edges. In other words, buy the hood the manufacturer recommends. Although I'll use whatever is necessary to get the look I want, I do have two favorite hair lights for my studio stuff. My all-time favorite for individual portraits is a beauty bowl with a grid spot. This particular bowl is 20 inches in diameter and holds a 25-degree grid. Because of the white deflector diffuser, which covers the flash head, light is evenly pushed out into the sides where it gets softened. And even though the light is bouncing around in all directions, the grid forces it to exit the dish in a straight line, expanding at only 25 degrees from the center. When it's properly placed, it will not flare onto the camera lens. For groups, or to throw a semicircular light that covers the top of the head and both shoulders, I like to use a strip light. This particular one measures 1 foot by 6 feet, and it will do that when centered over, but placed behind my subjects. I also use a strip light when I want to softly and evenly illuminate an entire side of a client. I can either mount it on a boom arm or a regular light stand, placing it just high enough so any shadows from ears or hair will fall down and not across, and certainly not up my subject. I find a boom arm is more versatile because I can readily see the changes from a distance just by moving the vertical axis. In a classic portrait, the background light is placed to show on the side opposite the key. It's like a kicker in reverse, because its light doesn't fall on the subject, but the subject is still separated from the background. Like any other light, the use of modifiers will affect its shape and look. And the final look of your image is entirely up to you, but here are a few tips. When using a basic parabolic reflector for a background light, I recommend using a grid spot, because the spread of the light will be minimized and the fall off, that is the distance between the transition zone and the shadow, will be the shortest. While I don't recommend an umbrella, I think the spread of light is too fast and way too great for my taste, I do think a softbox makes a terrific background light. And for this image, I've placed a small 2 by 2 foot softbox just below camera and slightly to camera left to throw this interesting shaped light behind my subject. Strip lights also make excellent background lights. If you'd like a beautiful sunset horizon look, just put a long strip light on the floor, center it behind the subject, and tilt it up slightly. Or tilt it up at an angle, and you'll get an uneven horizon. Beautiful stuff. Here's a neat trick. If you know you'll be cropping into the top of the subject's head, set up a bookend directly behind the subject. Flare it out no wider than the subject as seen by the camera, and make sure it's butted right up to the background. From the shadow side, aim the background light at where the bookend meets the background. The result is a background light that's strongest right behind the subject, but with light that doesn't spill to the other side. You may have been taught to set a fourth light on the opposite side of the key to fill in the shadows, and you may have even been taught to power both lights equally or to power the shadow side down by a half stop. Either way is a big mistake and will only lead to problems with the multiple shadows that will fall on each side of the nose. Not only will you see multiple broad shadows, but the shadows on the sides of the nostrils will be accented because no light from either source will get in there. If you learn to set your key this way, I urge you to forget that scenario right now. There's only one way to use a second front light, and that's to place it as close to the camera lens as possible. For a complete explanation of a 4-light setup that works like a charm, see Will Crockett's Digital Lighting 2 DVD. Get all the details there. I think it's a great idea to have some lights preset with modifiers attached. If you're meeting your subject for the first time and have to make quick decisions as to what will look best, you'll have a selection close at hand. Be sure to include modifiers for the background and the hair lights too. If you have already met the subject and made a predetermination about what will look good, you have access to other devices should you change your mind or see a new opportunity.